The boardroom was cold that morning, not because of the weather outside, but because of the kind of coldness that only certain rooms carry. Rooms where powerful people make decisions about other people's lives without losing a single night of sleep over it. Marcus Elliot sat near the end of the long table. He was 34 years old, calm, and dressed in a blazer that had seen better days. His shoes were clean but not expensive. His watch was simple. He did not look like a man who belonged in a room full of tailored suits and gold cufflinks. But he was there, and for 3 years, he had been the reason that room had anything worth sitting in. He had built everything. When Marcus first joined Novacrest Solutions, it was a company that was slowly sinking. The clients were leaving. The technology was outdated. The team was tired and losing hope. Nobody wanted to work there, and the ones who stayed were only waiting for a better offer somewhere else. Marcus changed that. Quietly, without asking for attention, he rebuilt the company's entire digital system from the ground up. He worked before sunrise and long after midnight. He skipped family gatherings. He missed birthdays. He gave up weekends without complaining. He solved problems that the senior team could not even fully understand. And slowly, steadily, Novacrest began to rise. Within 3 years, Fortune 500 companies were calling. Contracts were being signed. Revenue was growing. The company that once struggled to pay its own bills was now being taken seriously by the biggest names in the industry. Marcus did not do it for praise. He did it because he believed in the work. He believed that if you put your best into something, it would speak for itself. He was wrong about one thing, though. He believed that results were enough. He believed that what you built mattered more than where you came from or who you knew. He believed that a state university degree and years of honest, brilliant work would protect him in a room full of people who valued none of those things. That belief was about to be tested. Gerald Whitmore walked into the boardroom the way he always did, like a man who had never once doubted himself. He was 60 years old, silver-haired, and had the kind of confidence that comes not from hard work, but from a lifetime of being told that you are special. He had gone to the right schools, joined the right clubs, married into the right family, and climbed into the CEO's chair at Novacrest through connections that had nothing to do with talent. Gerald was not a bad businessman in the traditional sense. He was charming. He was good in front of clients. He knew how to fill a room with his voice and make people feel like they were hearing something important, even when they were not. But he had a quiet problem that he kept very carefully hidden. He did not fully understand the technology that was now making his company successful. And the man who did understand it, the man who had built it all, made Gerald feel deeply uncomfortable without either of them ever saying a word about it. The meeting that morning was supposed to be a quarterly review. Numbers, updates, plans for the next few months. Marcus had prepared his reports. He had printed the data. He was ready. But Gerald had prepared something else entirely. He stood up at the head of the table, straightened his tie, and picked up a printed document. He began to read from it slowly, in that careful, measured voice he used when he wanted everyone to pay close attention. And what he read was not a business update. It was a list of complaints about Marcus. Anonymous complaints, unnamed sources, vague language about Marcus's leadership being difficult and unstable. Words like disorganized and emotionally volatile were used. Gerald read them out loud, one by one, in front of every executive, every department head, and several clients who had been invited to this meeting and were now watching in complete silence. Then Gerald paused, looked up from the paper, and looked directly at Marcus. He mentioned Marcus's university. He said it gently, almost kindly, the way people sometimes say cruel things, wrapped in a soft voice so they can later claim they meant no harm. Miserendes. He suggested, with a small smile, that perhaps someone of Marcus's background might find a better fit at a smaller company. A simpler company, a company that did not operate at this level. Someone at the table laughed. Then a few others joined in. Not everyone. Some sat in uncomfortable silence, staring at the table. But enough people laughed that the sound filled the room. Marcus sat completely still. He did not raise his voice. He did not argue. He did not defend himself or point to the work he had done, or ask anyone in that room to remember what Novacrest had looked like before he arrived. His hands were flat on the table. His face was calm. Only someone watching very closely would have noticed the slight tightening of his jaw. He picked up his pen. He wrote one sentence on the notepad in front of him. He tore the page out neatly, folded it once, and slipped it into the breast pocket of his blazer. Then he stood up, nodded once at the room, not with anger, not with bitterness, just a simple nod, and he walked out. The laughter followed him into the hallway. Then the door closed, and it was gone. He drove home in silence. He did not call anyone. He did not send any messages. He sat in his apartment that evening, with the lights low, and thought for a very long time. He thought about the years he had given. He thought about the nights he had worked, while everyone else slept. He thought about the clients he had brought in, the systems he had designed, the problems he had solved at 3 a.m. because no one else knew how. And then he stopped thinking about all of that. Because he understood something in that silence that would take most people years to learn. He understood that what had happened in that room had nothing to do with his work. It had nothing to do with his degree, or his background, or his blazer. It had everything to do with fear. Gerald Whitmore was afraid of a man who could do things he could not. And afraid people, when they have power, do not ask the person threatening them to leave quietly. They humiliate them publicly so that no one in the room dares to take their side. Marcus understood this, and understanding it meant he did not have to carry any of it. He made himself a simple meal, ate it slowly, and went to sleep at a reasonable hour for the first time in 3 years. The next morning, he woke up early and began to build. He had not told anyone this, but for several months before that boardroom meeting, Marcus had been in quiet conversations with 2 venture capital firms. These were people who had watched Novacrest's rise from the outside and had started asking a quiet question among themselves. Who is actually doing this? Who is the mind behind the growth? They had done their research. They had read the technical documents. They had spoken to engineers who had worked alongside Marcus. They knew exactly who was responsible. 6 weeks after walking out of that boardroom, Marcus signed a funding agreement worth $4.2 million for his own company. He named it Elliot Systems. He rented a modest co-working space across town, set up 3 desks, and got to work. 3 engineers followed him from Novacrest. They had all been in the building the day of the boardroom meeting. None of them had laughed. Each of them had sent Marcus a private message that same evening. The messages were short and said more or less the same thing. Wherever you go, we are coming with you. Marcus built a team of 8 people in the first 3 months. They were young, sharp, and deeply motivated. He told them on the first day that he did not want a company built on ego. He wanted a company built on craft. He wanted people who cared about the quality of their work more than the title on their business card. He wanted honesty in the room at all times, even when honesty was uncomfortable. They believed him, and they worked. What Marcus was building was a data security platform unlike anything currently available in the enterprise software market. It used artificial intelligence to detect and respond to security threats in real time, and it could be integrated into a company's existing systems in a fraction of the time that other platforms required. He had been thinking about this for years. He had sketched the architecture late at night while working at Novacrest, in the margins of notebooks, on the backs of printed reports. Now he had time to build it properly. He worked long hours, but differently than before. Before, he had worked with the energy of someone trying to prove something. Now he worked with the calm of someone who already knew what he was capable of and simply needed the space to do it. There is a difference between those 2 states, and the work that comes from the second one is almost always better. 18 months passed. During those 18 months, something was quietly happening at Novacrest Solutions. Without Marcus, the digital infrastructure that had powered the company's growth began to show cracks. The systems he had built were complex and carefully layered, and the new technical team that Gerald had hired could not fully understand them. Small problems appeared, then bigger ones. Client portals began experiencing delays. Data reports started coming back with errors. 2 large accounts, companies that Marcus had personally brought to Novacrest, raised concerns and then quietly moved their business elsewhere. Gerald responded the way he always did when things went wrong. He blamed the team below him, hired expensive outside consultants, and gave interviews to industry magazines in which he spoke confidently about vision and innovation, and the exciting future ahead. The board of directors was not as easily reassured. Revenue was falling. A third major client announced they were reviewing their contract. The company's valuation dropped by 31% in a single quarter. Shareholders began asking loud, uncomfortable questions in meetings that Gerald could not talk his way out of. Then came the news that the entire industry seemed to hear at once. Elliot Systems had been acquired by TechVault Global, one of the most respected enterprise software corporations in North America. The deal was valued at $380 million. The name Marcus Elliot appeared in every major business publication within 48 hours. His face was on the cover of a technology magazine the following month. The article told the story of how he had spent 3 years rebuilding a failing company, been publicly dismissed, and then quietly built something worth nearly $400 million in under 2 years. He was photographed in his office. Not a grand office. A clean, simple room with large windows, a wooden desk, and a whiteboard covered in diagrams. He was wearing a plain shirt. He looked relaxed. He looked like someone who had slept well the night before. The article quoted him once, on the subject of the boardroom meeting. A journalist had asked him how he felt that day, walking out of the room. He thought about it for a moment, and then said this: "Humiliation is just information. It tells you exactly who you are dealing with, and exactly why you need to leave." He said nothing else about Gerald. Nothing about the laughter. Nothing about the years of work that had gone without proper recognition. He moved on from the question, the way a man moves past something that no longer has any weight for him. Gerald Whitmore resigned from NovaCrest Solutions 3 months after the TechVault announcement. The official statement said it was a mutual decision and wished him well in future endeavors. The board released a separate statement saying the company would be undergoing significant restructuring. Within a year, NovaCrest was sold off in pieces to 3 separate buyers. The name disappeared from the market entirely. 2 of the executives who had laughed in that boardroom reached out to Marcus directly in the months that followed. Their messages were professional and polite. They mentioned their experience and asked if there might be any opportunities at Elliot Systems or within the TechVault network. Marcus read both messages himself. He replied to both, briefly, warmly, and without a single sharp word. He thanked them for reaching out and passed their information to his team to handle through the standard process. He had a company to run. There is something worth understanding about the kind of man Marcus Elliot was. He was not a man who spent energy on what had been done to him. He had sat in that boardroom and felt the full weight of that room's contempt, and he had chosen in that very moment not to give it any more of his life than the time it took to walk out the door. That was not weakness. That was one of the most powerful decisions a person can make. He did not build Elliot Systems to prove Gerald wrong. He built it because he had something real to offer the world, and he needed the freedom to offer it. The success was not revenge. It was simply the natural result of ability meeting opportunity, and the opportunity had only arrived because he had walked away from the room that was trying to shrink him. The people who had laughed did not understand this. They thought the story was about humiliation. It was never about that. It was about a man who knew his own value so clearly that a room full of people denying it could not make him doubt it for a single moment. That kind of certainty is rare. It cannot be taught in a classroom or bought with money. It is built through years of honest work, quiet sacrifice, and the deep personal knowledge that what you create is real. Marcus had built real things. He knew it. And that knowing was something no one in any boardroom could ever take from him. Years later, at a small private event hosted by TechVault for their leadership team, someone asked Marcus if he still had the note, the piece of paper he had written on, and slipped into his pocket before walking out of that boardroom. The question came from a young engineer at the table, someone who had read the magazine article and been thinking about it ever since. Marcus smiled. He reached into his jacket and produced a folded piece of paper. It was slightly worn at the edges, the way things get when they have been carried for a long time. He unfolded it and passed it across the table without a word. The young engineer read it. Then she looked up. "Remember this feeling. You will need it." She handed it back carefully, as if it were something important, because it was. Marcus folded it, slipped it back into his pocket, and picked up his coffee. "I still carry it," he said simply. "Not because I am angry. Because I never want to forget what it feels like to be underestimated. It keeps me honest." The table was quiet for a moment. Then the conversation moved on, the way conversations always do. There were new ideas to discuss, new problems to solve, new things to build. And Marcus Elliot, the man they had laughed at in a cold boardroom not so many years ago, leaned forward in his chair and got back to work. Because that was always what he had done best.